All right, welcome to our webinar today. Today we're going to be talking about the Inflation Reduction Act and how that's really going to potentially impact environmental programs in industry, some of the funding and some of the measures in that. There's a couple things that caught my eye, and Maureen Gorsen is a partner at Sidley, and she's here today as our guest on Coffee and Compliance, talking and sharing her views on the Inflation Reduction Act. So thank you very much for being here today, Maureen.
Sure, happy to be here.
Yeah, and I guess to kick things off, if you want to give a little bit of background, I know you were a general counsel at CalEPA and California Natural Resources Agency, and were the director of California DTSC, and now you're in private practice at Sidley. If you can give a little bit of background and what you cover at Sidley.
Sure, I'm very old. I've been around a very long time. So I started practicing environmental law before the first Rio Conference on Climate in 1989, so a long time ago, and came out to California, worked as general counsel of natural resources for Governor Wilson. So that would be geothermal, oil, gas, Endangered Species Act, coastal, all the basically Department of Interior for the state of California. And then I went into private practice and did, I would say, a bugs and bunnies practice, land use, environmental compliance, permitting, project approval. And then I got swept up in the recall for Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I came back up to Sacramento to be the general counsel of CalEPA, which is California's US EPA. Did that for a few years, and then he made me director of the Department of Toxic Substances Control. And so when I left the Schwarzenegger administration, I went back to private practice, and I stayed in the Sacramento area. So I work here in my living room in Sacramento, but my office is in LA, and we help every kind of manufacturing industrial client globally with anything California is doing that affects their business. So I'm a regulatory attorney. I also do a lot of enforcement defense. Anytime a regulatory agency is involved in your business, whether it's at the beginning where they're developing rules, or at the end where they're enforcing rules, or the DA is enforcing them, or the AG is enforcing them, that's pretty much my area: statutes, regulations, and how agencies develop them and implement them and enforce them.
Yeah, and on a global presence or for global industry.
Globally, yeah. Sidley is 22 offices around the world. So Europe, Asia, the Americas, everywhere. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So a big footprint. One of the things today we wanted to jump into was the Inflation Reduction Act. And I guess I'm curious, what was your first impression when it passed as it relates to environmental compliance or environmental regulations for industry? What was your initial take on that?
Well, it's mostly a financial bill, right? It's mostly fiscal. It is incentivizing investment decisions. So our big hedge fund, private equity, sovereign wealth fund clients are looking at that to make big billion-dollar bets in carbon capture, in clean technologies, in low carbon fuels, low carbon materials, critical minerals for the coming electric battery storage needs. So you look at the amount of incentives. It's all about incentives in this bill. 800 pages of tax incentives, funding incentives, grant incentives. So it gives a lot of money to the agencies to develop new regs, but that's very broad discretion. So we'll have to watch how the agencies take the new authority and new money they're given in this bill and how they use it. But it's all about the money and directing money away from oil and gas and towards low carbon activities.
Yeah. How much was the counterbalance on funding for the agency side versus for agencies for enforcement or developing new regs around it versus funding new initiatives to go fuel clean tech? I mean, I saw much more on the economic development side than the regulatory side.
Yeah, it's billions and billions and billions, hundreds of billions for clean tech investment. And I want to say about 10 billion for the agencies. I may be off, it could be 20 billion,
Yeah.
all these billions. Right? It's
Yeah,
a lot of
it's a
money,
stuff.
even if it's just 20 billion, that's a lot of money.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is.
but
What
it's
do you
not
think?
the 300, 400 billion that the other people are getting.
Yeah, do you think it's what do you see as the most significant impact for industry from the regulatory side? For this funding that came out for specific agencies on the regulatory side, is there anything that jumped out in terms of
Well, for an
potential
industrial
impact?
facility, on the regulatory side, what's coming is fence line monitoring. What's coming is GHG reporting, right? What's coming is a lot more EJ community activism in your site, and they will be very well funded. I think there's 9 billion for them to basically develop their community organizations and start developing data as to what your facility is doing in their community. But that's all coming, right?
Yeah, very, very much so. I think one of the things that jumped out at me is the fence line monitoring, very specifically calling that out, and how much they called about transparency of data and like public access to all this data, and the funding for the agencies to develop better data systems, better software technology to report out that. Is there anything for your clients or industry in general that you've been kind of recommending or on the data front?
Well, you have to realize that we've got the SEC rules that are now going to require corporate reporting of environmental social governance, right? Socioeconomic governance. Those are in development, right? So the SEC is working on those. Independent of the SEC rules, which will be required of public companies, lots of companies do voluntary climate reduction things as part of their just general sustainability. Well, this IRA is going to give new EPA oversight over both those things, both the voluntary things that companies do, some companies it's more like a chief sustainability officer doing it, some companies it's a chief marketing officer doing it, and some companies it's the head of EHS doing it, right? And depending on who's been assigned these kinds of things inside the company, they take a different shape in how they're communicated. But EPA is going to have oversight authority in the future over the voluntary as well as the SEC. And the difference between the voluntary and the SEC, both of those are focused at corporate level. So wherever your headquarters is, they're doing on a corporate level that kind of reporting. And EPA is going to be focused on facility level. So how that new EPA overlay is going to work with these other two things, and then realize California has its own specific climate reporting, GHG and fuel, low carbon fuel. And then there was a bill this year, SB 260, to take the SEC ESG reporting and apply it to every private company as well as public company doing a certain amount of business in California. And even though that bill died by just a few votes, it'll come back. So I think all of these, it's going to be many, many layers. And then if you're just your regular EHS person, you're familiar with the Integrated Compliance Information System that EPA has, and they use that to track NPDES compliance under the Clean Water Act, and they use it for stationary source permit compliance under the Clean Air Act. But there is a modernization board that was established last year, and this year in 2022, they're laying the groundwork for how they're going to modernize this system. And so the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, includes a lot of funding to include GHG and climate reporting into that system, which heretofore has not existed. It's only been your permit required, data reporting that's been in it. And then who knows how that system will be including the new fence line reporting and monitoring that environmental justice communities are about to get 9 billion in funding to start measuring basically community ambient air around your facility, not point sources at your facility, but the ambient air around your facility. And who knows how that data will be integrated in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think they gave 20 million to EPA for like improving the software system, but then if you're putting 9 billion on the fence line and community groups to push, and if they decide to push that data in, one thing that's been brought up is like the quality of data that's being pushed in real time.
Mhm.
And is that enough funding and the ability to manage such a large data set? Because once all that data is in there and the public starts looking at it, using it, it just opens up potentially a new host of issues for
Well, it's also
companies.
right now, you monitor your own data as a
Right.
facility and you report your data. And so you have your own consultants and you have certain quality control on that. This could include data submitted by community groups, of which we have no idea how they're gathering, right? And what kind of accountability controls will be on that.
Yeah. Is there anything that you advise companies to do around that to kind of get ahead of this or more proactively um, address some of these data things or data challenges?
Well, I mean, right now, I mean, I would make sure whatever you're reporting, for your facility under your permits is accurate, right? There's no sense in, I mean, starting to gather fence line data without knowing whether you're going to have fence line data being gathered
Right.
at your facility. I know that if there's a problem with your permit itself, if you mess up on your own permit reporting and enforcement action is brought, it is now a very standard thing for the Department of Justice to add a fence line monitoring requirement in your consent judgment or your settlement agreement with the agency. So, while we wait for years for the funding and the programs to kind of roll out, um, if you mess up on your existing data now, that could be a consequence. You could be one of the first ones out of the gate with these new community ambient air requirements applying to your facility.
Yeah. Have you seen an increased investment on the company side on data systems internally to either for like the California specific reporting or elsewhere? How much of an investment do you see internally from companies on building better data sets internally and having
I
that
haven't
kind of
seen
quality
much.
assurance?
I haven't seen much. I mean, most of the questions I'm getting coming out of this honestly require involvement of our tax attorneys because there's so many tax credits galore, and this bill for the first time allows transferability of tax credits, which is a total game changer. It means that you as a nonprofit could develop a tax credit and then sell the tax credit. And the sale of the tax credit will not be income to you, right? It's 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 really incredible. So right now, with all of the investment incentives, like, okay, where should I put my money? Whether I'm operating fleets or I am purchasing construction materials, if you use low carbon construction materials, if you retrofit your facility, if you get into clean fleets, if you change your fuel sources, there's so much free money in this that everybody is just looking at, okay, how do I take advantage of all the financial incentives in here, and how do I plan out whatever I'm doing for my facility and my purchases for my facility, or whatever kind of capital investments I'm thinking about for my facility, given all the freebies here.
Yeah. So you're seeing it more on the investment on how do I make a cleaner facility or a cleaner fleet and really take advantage of it
Yeah,
across, and is that as across all different types of industries?
everything: batteries, minerals, production materials, fleets, everything that you're doing, right? Where you're sourcing everything, whether you're going to engage in carbon capture contracts, air capture, whatever you're doing.
Have you seen any particular industries really benefit more than others from from the IRA? You mentioned some of the fleet stuff and some of the mining and batteries. Have you seen any particular industries really having kind of outsized advantage on the financial side for this?
Well, there's a lot of advantages for cement and steel if they are investing in low carbon production of those materials. There's going to be a new environmental production product declaration form So those materials will have a greater advantage going forward, not only in the private marketplace, but in government procurement. Nuclear is a winner here. Believe it or not, coal is a winner here. There's a lot of incentives for on-site carbon capture for these facilities. This is a bonanza for anyone doing biofuels or hydrogen fuels. Anyone involved in a lowering the carbon of any part of the supply chain. The big losers here are RPs and Superfund sites, oil and gas facilities, and probably home builders and consumers. I mean, this is called the Inflation Reduction Act, but I don't see a lot in here that actually reduces inflation, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Not that I'm a
that's
macro economist, but it seems like it's the opposite of that. But
yeah. It seems more pushing towards addressing climate change and environmental impact and clean technologies through
yeah, and
economic
there's a
growth.
lot on lowering pharmaceutical costs and healthcare costs. So there's a lot of stuff in here.
Yeah. Why the kind of, you mentioned the coal being a winner here, but oil and gas not. Why was that split? Is it just come down to politics, or is there
Yeah,
something else going on there?
yeah. There was the Build Back Better bill. It's the BBB bill from the House that had a lot more in it than the Inflation Reduction Act did, and it didn't pass because of Joe Manchin from West Virginia. So Joe Manchin was the key, and he wanted to ensure the survival of the coal industry in West Virginia. So
So that led to the push with more stuff for coal in this Inflation
right, the
Reduction
ability
Act.
to do carbon capture, the ability to do air capture, keep that industry alive as we transition to renewables.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I want to go back to one of the things you said about the greenhouse gas accounting. Do you see, or what do you see from a risk level for companies when they're reporting out, whether it's greenhouse gas or even the SEC or EPA reporting? How much risk do you see in like people making errors in their calculations or what they're reporting out? My experience has been on the sustainability reporting side. A lot of people make estimates or use older data sets when estimating some of that. And we've seen and heard more emphasis on making sure you have the most up-to-date data and you can back up those estimates and those justifications and where you're sourcing that data. Because there's going to be more scrutiny, and with the SEC involved, there's even more potential penalties. What have you heard on that, or what do you see from companies on that, on ensuring kind of accuracy of what's being reported?
Well, I mean, that goes to my first point about the voluntary. So a lot of this has been voluntary, right? And so people are using different protocols, right? And kind of picking and choosing amongst data sets. And that's why you're seeing a wide variability in the reporting that's been going on. There's a big tranche of money to EPA to provide standardization of these widgets that we're counting, right? So you have the SEC developing a rulemaking right now that's going to put regulations in place to standardize the reporting they're receiving. And then EPA is going to be doing a rulemaking to standardize the reporting and how they will be judging and overseeing voluntary compliance reporting. And so, when people put out their corporate sustainability, annual report or whatever, there'll be EPA oversight, and there'll probably be NGO groups also applying these new standardized, transparent, factors for the widgets and grading corporate sustainability statements. To the extent that they're not just preparing them for the SEC rules, right, but also preparing them for other broader climate goals that company may have.
Yeah, and we've seen obviously citizen group action under Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and there can be shareholder action on the sustainability front with the SEC. Do you see anything from like NGOs or citizen lawsuits coming in? Is there any provisions in these regulations that allow that, or is a lot of the enforcement largely going to be through EPA?
Oh no, this is a plaintiff's lawyer's bonanza, because now that the EPA, there's going to be much more public information available, right? Once the EJ groups get their fence line monitoring grants and they start publishing this information, to the extent that there's some pollutant that is prevalent in a low income EJ community, there'll be lawsuits to try to attribute the source and cause of that. And you don't need any cause of action in the Inflation Reduction Act itself, because so far those kinds of lawsuits have come under common law nuisance. They've come under unfair business practices claims, which there's already statutory authority for that, or they've come under false claims or fraudulent claims laws. So to the extent that a company is saying we're climate neutral, and they come in and say, oh no, you're not, they'll come in with unfair business practice and false claims act under other statutes. So there's other statutes that they can rope these new transparency standardization factors into.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing it correctly, it's the $9 billion that's put into the data collection, the fence line monitoring, the groups, is just going to fund and fuel all sorts of litigation around this. And there's a variety of mechanisms that they can do it under.
Yeah, I mean, basically every EJ group wants the industrial facility in their community to be shut down and moved to someplace else, right? So this is just going to give them more tools in the toolbox to do that.
Yeah. How does industry operate then? I mean, if there's more funding to push them out of those communities, I mean, how does industry operate?
They would like you to get to clean tech, right? So that you're not using any kind of fossil fuels, you're not emitting anything, right? So to the extent that you can start moving to non-fossil fuel sources for your energy needs, I mean, that's what this whole bill is about incentivizing you to do that faster, while also saying, hey, we're going to give this money to enforcement folks, whether it's the community activists or the government, to make sure that your whatever you are doing there is not impacting the community. Yeah.
You mentioned cement industry. I mean, cement, heavy and energy intensive for cement kilns. Is there a lot to do towards carbon capture for them, or where in the cement industry do you see this having a big impact?
Right, direct air capture, carbon capture, that's going to have to be a big part of their future plans. With this new standardized environmental product declaration form, they're going to want to have their cement be the low carbon cement.
Just as a pure sales and marketing play, it's great for business.
So they're whatever they have to do to look at inputs, outputs, process, they're going to have to be squeezing that down every which way they can. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess, is there anything else that you want to comment on IRA and as it relates to industry and environmental programs? Is there anything else that you think companies should really be paying attention to?
I think the first thing you guys got to do is call your tax attorney, right? There's just so much free money. I mean, and there's adders. It's like, okay, if you're doing this, you get a 10% tax credit. But if you're doing this in a brownfield area, you add another 10%. If you're doing this in an area that's low income, you get another 10%. I mean, the 10% tax credit becomes the 30% tax credit, and then realize they're transferable. So you can sell them. And when you sell them, they don't attribute income to you. There's just so much in terms of financial incentives that I think that's the very first thing every corporation needs to be looking at. Like, if you're operating fleets, if you're even leasing fleets, what are you leasing? I think also you're gonna have to pay attention to these new rules that are coming out that are gonna affect you in terms of the reporting and the fence line monitoring, and you might want to watch what the modernization board is coming up with, because that's going to feed into the renewals of your individual facility permits, your Title V permits, your NPDES permits. It's all of that stuff is going to find its way into your facility permit eventually as well.
Yeah, so some good points there, both on the tax economic side, but also on just what EPA has for data and paying attention to that as they increase the reporting around it. We're almost at the end of the time here. I really appreciate you coming on, Maureen, and kind of sharing some insights on the Inflation Reduction Act and just what's going on, even beyond the kind of narrow scope of EHS and some of the economic things to think about, especially for EHS leaders as they work with operations and finance at their facilities. Yeah, and we can connect you with anybody that has more questions on this and how you can help through your practice. I really appreciate you jumping on today.
Sure, happy to be here. And yeah, we have teams of people looking at various aspects for various niches in industry. So there's something for everybody in here. 800 pages worth.
Yeah, it sounds it. Well, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining today, and we'll send out the recording and the podcast of this at the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ryan. Bye-bye.
Thanks.